talk by my colleague, co-author, and a longtime friend, Dr. Oleg Sobchuk. He's currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History. And his work primarily is concentrating around the cultural evolution of art. And he works with important and really understudied topics of cultural change, success of artistic forms, innovation process in art, and focuses on the narrative forms of literature and film. For those who are interested or are like broadly interested or newcomers to the topic, I also highly recommend his dissertation that is titled Charting Artistic Evolution, an Essay in Theory, that kind of elegantly ties together several scientific fields and proposes a coherent vision for humanities theory-driven research. And without further ado, Oleg, the floor is all yours, and I hope you don't get mad at me for recommending your dissertation, which was, of course, written a few years ago, and your views could change. But I still value it quite highly and recommend to the peers.
Thank you. No, thank you, Tim. How can I be mad for such a nice and generous introduction? No, it was, yeah. The talk is titled From Stylometry to Phylogeny Towards Large-Scale History of Genres. And first, I need to make a brief kind of excuse. Is that most recently my work had to do with the cultural evolution of films, and I know that at your lab you mostly study literature, except Joanna, I think, but mostly you study literary style and text analysis of literature. So that's why I decided to speak about the project, which is not finished yet. So it's very much in progress, and some parts are very far from being completed, while some other parts are pretty well done already. So I hope you will excuse that, but it will possibly make for even more interesting discussion. So several years ago with Franco Moretti, we wrote a paper where we review the field of digital humanities, or at least partly. And we pointed out that, if one looks at the papers that study the diachronical aspects of literature computationally, the most frequent representation of history would be something what we see here on the right image, like a trend line, a plot which is, by the way, is from a paper by Mark Olgi Hewitt and his collaborators about the dialogicity in Anglophone fiction. And so here we see, right, so on y-axis there is mean quotes per 1,000 words, so one particular trait, and then we see some change in frequency of this particular trait. So it either decreases or increases in frequency. And this is, of course, a very typical kind of depicting or thinking about history as a temporal change of one trait. And of course, there is nothing wrong with trend lines. But the question that I want to ask today is, is there an alternative model of representing history? Is there something that can give us a different view of the history of literature when we studied computation? And I think there is an alternative. So another type of modeling history is a phylogeny. It's often used in evolutionary biology, of course, and in genetics, but also it's used in this new, or maybe already not so new, field called cultural evolution. So it's not new anymore, but it's still an underdog. I think that's a good way of speaking about it. For example, phylogenies are the main tool at the Department of Linguistic and Cultural Evolution here in Jena and in Leipzig at Max Planck's, and they allow linguists to tackle all kinds of interesting questions about their subject and answer these questions. For example, testing the hypothesis about the origins or dating the origins of certain language families, like in the paper on the right, on the left, or for example, testing the hypothesis about the relatedness between some types of cultural artifacts and looking whether there is genetic relationship between them or whether it was mostly borrowing, like in the case of the study of folktales by Jamie Tehrani. So the question is, can we do something similar, or can we use a similar way of modeling for literature? And by literature, I mean modern literature. It's like 2, 3, 4 last hundreds of years. So not the folk tales, but for example, novel or drama or poetry or short stories, things like this. In his book Graphs, Maps, Trees, as well as in some other publications, Franco Moretti suggested some hypothetical trees of literary evolution. For example, on this plot, you see a hypothetical tree of the development of one particular device. It's free indirect speech. And as you see, according to this tree, it evolved with Goethe and Jane Austen, and then kind of was borrowed by Gustave Flaubert. Then it branches out into all kinds of different directions, being borrowed, repurposed, modified by other authors. What I'm interested in here is, asking, can we build phylogenies of literature that would be not hypothetical, that would be based on some solid data similar to ones done by the linguists and by other cultural evolutionists? Before this, we should answer a question, though. Why would we even do this? So why do we need this type of modeling literary history if we need it? And my answer to this is that we need it for several purposes. So we do not need it for the purpose for which it is most typically used in linguistics, which is for dating the splitting events between languages. For example, trying to predict when were the origins of Indo-European family. So like, we don't need to do this because in literature, we're dealing of course with much more recent data. We know all the dates already, we don't need to do that. But I think there are two important purposes which such a tree could serve. And one important purpose is, like, I think it's very basic by being both simple and kind of important, is that it would allow us to have kind of a map of literary history, like an analog of a tree of life, even though it sounds kind of cheesy, but so a map on which we would see where different genres are located, how different genres were borrowing from each other, where different individual works are located, with regards to different genres, and so on. And for now, we don't have such a map. And the second question is, I think that such a tree would serve as a good basis, or not a tree, I should fix it. So it's not a tree, but a phylogeny, because I will later will speak why what we should use not necessarily is actually a tree, but still a phylogeny. So it would allow us to test other hypotheses about the large-scale patterns in literary history. For example, what is the prevalence of combinatorial innovation as opposed to kind of individual innovation by authors, or what is the impact of some particular books for the development of genres? What are the lifespans of different genres, of different branches on this tree, and so on. Well, I mentioned that phylogeny doesn't necessarily have to be a tree, and there is this famous image from Alfred Kroeber's book. I don't remember its name, but it was published long ago, like in the 30s. And so I really love the caption to this tree. It's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that is human culture. Finally, though, this image is actually wrong, because the tree of life actually doesn't represent, this is not how the evolutionary tree of biology looks like. Evolutionary tree of biology looks much more like this. And this tree with, splitting events only, with branching only, it represents a very tiny fraction of the evolution of biological organisms, which is multicellular organisms. But all kinds of microbes and archaea and so on, all of these are, they evolve in this way. And, a microbiologist would say that this is the correct way of, and that this is the kind of correct phylogeny. I mean, this is an image, of course, but like just an example. So, and this image on the right, it is a rooted phylogenetic network. That's how it's called. So rooted phylogenetic networks, they are more complex than phylogenetic trees because they require more information to be built. They require not only information about the similarity between different leaves or the data points of the tree, they also require information about when and how the connections were actually happening, which is the data that biologists or cultural evolutionists or linguists usually do not have, because this data is not that rich. However, if we apply such a rooted phylogenetic network, which shows not only branching, but also reticulations or the combinations between the branches, to more recent data, such as literature, for example, then we can build this more complex and less simplistic image of, or map of literary history. And I will give you an example in the next slide. So this is an image from a paper by Mason Youngblood and his colleagues. So Mason is a postdoc in our lab. He's a biologist who is interested in music, and so he built a rooted phylogenetic network of electronic music. And here we can see, so everything begins from the good old disco, and then evolves into a large cluster of synth pop, and then kind of branches into all sorts of house, trance, and other genres. By the way, I should mention, so why this is called a rooted network, because we can have like a simple network which would not have a temporal dimension to it, and the word rooted means that it has the beginning and it has an end, so to say, and that's what it makes it a representation of literary history, as opposed to the networks that are often used in digital humanities for showing the relationships in authors, for example. Okay. Now, how do we build a phylogenetic network of literature, or a phylogeny of literature? Usually in cultural evolution, phylogenies are built with manually coded traits. So for example, this is like a toy example. Say we have a lot of different folk tales, tale 1, tale 2, and we have different events or elements that can be present or may not be present in the folk tale, like adventure in the woods, or does it feature murder, or does it has a sequence of repeated events, things like this. And this is how it was done for folk tales. This is how it's done for languages. This is how it's done in archaeology for archaeological artifacts. But unfortunately, this is how we cannot do it when studying literature, because it will be way too complex. Like imagine that every time you need to code a particular feature or a bunch of features, you need to read a whole novel. Like you need to have a really huge institute of people who would be willing to do that. And unfortunately, there is none. And maybe this is not even the best possible way, because what we can do is use computational tools for extracting these traits from the text automatically and comparing this text automatically as well. Okay, and this is where computational stylometry comes into play. Because stylometry has a huge expertise in actually extracting such important, useful traits from texts and comparing them and finding similarities and differences between different texts automatically. The problem is, however, the stylometry is interested in style, as it's obvious from its name, usually for the purpose of authorship attribution, while we are here interested in a broader set of similarities, in thematic similarities. And so what we need is a kind of one could call computational thematic. So actually, when Artem and we came up with this title, it was kind of a like a playful play with computational stylistics. And so here comes the current study. On the right, you can see Artem. So if you don't know him, that's the guy with the dinosaur. So the goal of this current study, which is like a preparation for building a phylogenetic network, is to learn which combinations of text preprocessing, different traits, and different distance metrics works best for creating thematic clusters of texts, which then in the future can become the branches on the tree of literary evolution. By the way, there's a disclaimer that no trees of literary evolution will be shown today. So yeah, sorry, if you came for that, then I should disappoint you. And so this project basically, so what we did, we compared all kinds of combinations of these traits and created a kind of a competition between them. And the goal was to see which one performs the task of clustering text according to their thematic similarity best. For this, we had some ground truth data. We assembled a corpus of genres of fiction, 200 books, 50 books in each, pretty obvious genre, detectives, fantasy, science fiction, romance. Also, all the books that are in each particular genre are kind of these very obvious representatives of the genre, like Rex Stout or Isaac Asimov and people like this. So there is no weird text here, because the goal was to make it as simple as possible. Also, we controlled for time. So we included only the books published in the second half of the 20th century, because we, of course, don't want language change to impact very much our results. We want the results to be showing us thematic differences between texts and not some historical change in language. And then we tasked different algorithms for clustering these books, kind of removing their original labels, and to clustering them as close as possible to these true categories. Of course, true is in quotation marks, but this is like a conventionally given labels to these books. So what were the algorithms tested? So we had three buckets of algorithms. The first one were the algorithms for text preprocessing. We had three levels of thematic control, so to say. The low level of thematic control, where we, by the way, do you see my cursor? Just, you see, okay. Where we, okay, maybe I actually don't need it, where we just did the lemmatization and removed 100 most frequent words. The second level would be like stricter thematic control, where we lemmatize, remove named entities, apply stop list, some other things. And then the third one, where we do all of the above, but also use lexical simplification, where we replace non-frequent words with their more frequent semantic neighbors. The second basket of the algorithms is, or features that we've been varying, is the use of different text traits. So, for example, most frequent words, we tried different quantities. Then we used topic modeling with different number of topics. We used a very weird technique, Baroque technique called, with an elegant name, it's called the weighted gene co-expression network analysis. And why we did it, because so there's a paper says that you should use this and not topic modeling for clustering genre. It really works well. We believed it, we tried it, and got mixed results. And then we used doc2vec with 300 dimensions. I don't know if I think I mentioned at the beginning that yeah. So this study is done together with Artyom. So this is our very tight collaboration. I wouldn't know how to use doc2vec, or so Artyom is really very important mind here. So okay, so the third set of options is we use different distance measures. Basically, the standard combination of different distances. And additionally, which is quite important, we had some robustness checks. So because obviously, if we try all kinds of combinations of these algorithms and give them a task of creating a clusterization of genres, just simply by chance, one of these clusterings would be nearly perfect. And we didn't want to have this. So this is why we wanted to protect ourselves from chance, and we rerun this analysis 100 times by sampling a smaller number of books from each genre. So we took only 30 genres out of 50, and so every time in the analysis we had 120 books that needed to be clustered, and we did it 100 times. This actually increased the amount of computational time greatly, obviously, but as we learned later, it was a very good decision because it really helped us to avoid, so our decision of who is the winner and who is the loser is not random, and it would be more or less if we didn't do this. And now I will show some results which are still preliminary. So we kind of generated a lot of data with this, and we still have to do a proper statistical analysis of this data to figure out which traits works best. But we have some preliminary exploratory results, and I will show them to you now. So for comparing the clustering done by the algorithm to the true clustering, we used adjusted rand index, which is a measure of similarity between clusters. In our case, between predicted clusters and true clusters. And this measure of 1 means a perfect match between the clusters, and adjusted rand index of 0 means that this is as good as random. And in total, we had 30,805 clustering attempts, and the density, the distribution of the traits is shown on this plot. And as you can see, most of them do fairly good job of matching the genre classification, which was kind of the original one. And there are also some small number of algorithm, combination of algorithms that does a really good job. And of course, our task is to figure out what is located here and to use it later for constructing a tree. A couple of small kind of but important findings. So, for example, does text preprocessing matter? Does varying different approaches to preprocessing change anything? And we learned that it does change things for some particular metrics, and for some it doesn't. For example, it's really important when you do topic modeling. So it's the simplest level of thematic control doesn't do a great job at all for clustering texts. And the same actually is true for simple word vectors. It works much better when we use stricter thematic control, and for example, use thematic simplification or use only particular types, most content-bearing types of speech. Does the selection of different features matter? Yes, it does. We learned that different types of features show different results. And also what is important, I think, is that we also have pretty large differences in dispersion of these results, because, for example, topic modeling, it does show some good results, but also it's more unpredictable because we can have very good results of topic modeling, so which is this gray distribution, or we can also have very bad results of topic modeling. And with other ways of reducing the features, it works better. For example, it seems to be best with doc2vec, where the dispersion is smaller and it's kind of consistently, the results are consistently good. But interestingly, simple word vectors are not very far behind. And for when one has to decide whether to spend a lot of whether one has a lot of computational power and a lot of time or doesn't. So in this case, maybe if one doesn't have that, word vectors could be some particular kind of word vectors can be used for this purpose. Does distances matter? They do matter, and again, as we can see, some of them perform better, and some of them perform better with particular types of thematic control. Yeah, more predictable, less predictable. Finally, the larger picture of winners and losers. So each box on this box plot shows one particular combination that was used, and the dots here are this 100 attempts for each particular combination, and the colors mean the colors mean different types of features, and we can see that this some types of feature perform on average better than others. So this is but what we will do, we'll do proper statistical analysis. We'll learn which features work best, and then we will come up with the more specific answer of what is the best combination of traits, preprocessing, and this distance metrics that will be used later. Hopefully, we'll do this. I don't know, in some near future. All right, that was it. So this was the study about computational thematics and the introduction about phylogenies of literature, to give kind of an understanding of what this study is for. That this study is like a first step towards something something slightly different. Okay, so thank you for listening, and let's talk.
Thanks so much, Oleg, for the presentation. I'm kind of a weird position of chair and the co-author at the same time, but I will be primarily the chair. But sometimes I could tune for more technical questions.